Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for braving the cold and joining us. Welcome to our best practices, our second best practice series for 2014 on business model analytics and how to manage and guide your lean startup. And that's with Jon Worren, who is an entrepreneur in residence here at Mars. He is, and within that capacity as a consultant here, he tailors his expertise to guide startups. Some of you may know him. Jon is one of the facilitators for our Toolkits workshops, which is one of our experiential programs here. And he is, beyond Mars, Jon is the co-founder and president of Clear Sky Advisors, a renewable energy advisory firm in Toronto. He regularly advises clients on their key strategic and market needs, and he holds a Master's of Science in Media and Communications from London School of Economics and a Master of Science in Business and Economics from the Norwegian School of Management. Before I invite Jon to come up and begin his presentation, just two housekeeping details. We do have a mic for questions, so if you do have a question, please use the mic. We will try to, typically we try to reserve the question segment for after the presentation, but I'll leave that to Jon in terms of how he manages that. All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Gina. So welcome everybody to this session on best practices and the topic of business model analytics. It's a topic that I decided to develop this best practices session on after having done a number of business model design workshops, and a lot of people came up to me afterwards and they had questions about how to move forward and what was the sort of the important things that could help guide the work that they were doing related to finding a sustainable business model. So what we're going to talk about today is, first of all, what is a financially sustainable business model, and we're going to talk about some of the important business model metrics, some of the analytical processes, and we're going to go through some examples. Compared to a number of the other types of lectures that we have here at Mars, the Entrepreneurship 101 or our experiential workshops, the best practice is kind of a deep dive into a specific topic. So you will at times find a lot of information here. This is analytics, so I have to present you with lots of numbers and calculations and things like that. So I hope you're ready for the deluge. So my starting point here is a quote from Steve Blank, who informs a lot of our work, where he says that a startup is a temporary organization that is designed to search for a sustainable business model. So the sustainable business model, once you've identified that, kind of demarks where your organizational focus changes from search to execution. So once you find a sustainable business model, the whole point of the business model exercise is to scale, to grow, and to build an organization around that. Just to, so that we're all on the same page here, business model is defined as something that describes the value an organization offers to its customers and how it's organized in terms of the resources and the capabilities that are needed to deliver the value and acquire customers in that sense. So the definition is a bit of a mouthful, and it is a bit of a mouthful because a business model is complex. At Mars here, we use a tool, the business model canvas by Alex Osterwalder, to help us in the design process. So the canvas itself consists of 9 building blocks. There are multiple ways that it could be put together, and so that just illustrates some of the complexity. And even though this kind of is a representation of what a business model could look like or could be designed, it's not the entire truth of a business model. So to answer the question, what's a sustainable business model? There are some interesting things happening today because I feel it's a bit of a moving target. So Nijar Dewar, who's a prof at the Ivy School of Business, published this book, Tilt, in the fall. And what he says is that a lot of the emphasis within businesses are shifting from upstream to downstream, meaning that producing and creating products is actually becoming less and less challenging. Whether it's because we got now the advent of 3D printing, we all become better at building websites or apps or what have you, or just the fact that we're better at working with maybe a contract manufacturer overseas that can deliver things very cheaply. Whatever it is that drives down the cost of creating products, the flip side of that is that it's becoming more and more expensive to acquire customers. So the tilt sort of describes, even if I go back to the canvas here, the tilt sort of describes that the what's on your left-hand side of the can, which is essentially the upstream part, is becoming slightly easier, whereas the downstream part is becoming more complex and challenging. And for us at Mars, meaning that most of the startups that come in and work here, they actually come in on the basis of, yeah, we know something that we want to do, or we've already developed something as a product, so they got something on the left-hand side, but haven't quite figured out the right-hand side, so they're chasing this elusive, sustainable business model, and it is becoming more and more challenging. So the other things that I feel is making the quest for a sustainable business model a little bit challenging is this premise in the book by Rita McGrath, who's a prof at Columbia University at the business school there. What she says is that the whole idea of a sustainable competitive advantage is also changing. It is we're moving from a sustainable competitive advantage to what she calls a transient competitive advantage. So we cannot really, and it ties back to some of the things that the author of Tilt said as well, in the sense that so much of what producing and creating products is becoming commoditized, that we can't really base a business model around one single idea on your product side. You have to always be innovating and figuring it out. What would be your next competitive advantage? But if you bring that back to sort of a business model conversation, what it means is that you have to figure out other ways of creating competitive advantages for yourself. And it's the lean process, the lean startup methodology that we try to implement here for a lot of our clients is essentially a process of investigation, and a lot of it is focused on identifying how the customer acquisition process, a customer acquisition process that is profitable and that contributes to that financial sustainability at the business model level. And that investigation could look something like this. If you have a hypothesis that says, okay, the most important thing for me is retention rate, you investigate that particular building block. The previous week, you could be investigating channels, and that's the lean process, is this idea of figuring out which hypotheses are most critical for your startup and prioritizing those and investigating those as it goes along. So the ultimate measure of the sustainability of a business model is wrapped up in these two metrics here. Customer lifetime value has to be bigger than your customer acquisition cost. So if you cannot acquire customers cheaper than the profits that your customers are going to bring to you, you don't have a financially sustainable business model. And so this is kind of what the whole quest of a financial sustainable business model boils down to, is figuring out, okay, how can I get to that point? How can I get to a point where I have a repeatable, predictable customer acquisition process that allows me to say, okay, I know how this works now, so let's move forward and execute on this business model. So let's dive into the details here. Customer lifetime value is the first thing we're going to talk about. It's defined as the total profit a customer brings to your company over their lifetime. And the first variable that we're looking at is what we call MUC, or marginal unit contribution. So per sold unit, what is the essentially the gross margin of that? So you take your sales price, you deduct any sort of direct variable product cost into that and say, okay, this is what it delivers to the business, or what's left for the business, and that's called the MUC. And from a calculation perspective, what we want to find is what we call the average MUC per customer. So what is the marginal contribution per customer that you add to your customer base? Next, you want to figure out what's your retention rate. So are your customers, one-offs? Are they coming back? And if they're coming back, how many of your previous customers are coming back the next period around? So, retention rate, the definition, current retained customers over customer for the previous period. So there's a bit of there's a ratio over that. And then how you use that retention rate then to calculate the customer lifetime. So how long can you expect the customer to stay with you? And there's a bit of an equation, essentially, to figure that out. So let's look at a couple of examples. So let's say that the MUC, the marginal contribution, is about $10,000 per year for a new customer. You have an 80% retention rate, meaning that every year 80% of your customers come back. And you put that in, that means that your customer lifetime is 5 years. And then if you calculate the lifetime value, it's $50,000. Now, I picked these numbers just to establish a baseline for us to discuss, but also with a little bit of a question in mind, is that, if this is what it looks like for you, you are grappling with a quite fundamental question in terms of how to set up your customer acquisition organization, because you don't know at this point in time whether or not your customer lifetime value can afford you to have inside sales or a field sales organization. So it makes it a little bit difficult moving forward unless you know a couple of other things. So because if 50,000 is what you can expect per customer, a field sales representative, the cost of having a field sales representative can easily be somewhere in the region of $250,000 a year if they are covering a big territory and they're on the road a lot. So they're going to have to be able to pull that in, plus a lot more, in order to pay back something to the business. But whereas an inside sales rep costs something, maybe $50,000 to $75,000 a year, depending on the seniority that you're looking for, they have much lower customer base. So they don't need to close as many deals as an outside sales rep to make that happen. Now, if your MUC changes to 100 a year, so you're in a different business and it just is a much lower price point in your transactions, you have this, all the other metrics are the same, your lifetime value is $500. Now that puts a whole other dilemma in here. In terms of the acquisition process, can you have any person at all be involved in that? Because the minute the person started talking to another person, it becomes a very expensive customer acquisition process. So if your lifetime value is at this level, you have to find a way of automating the acquisition process, through putting in e-commerce, building automated lead generation processes, and so forth. And then finally, I just changed the retention rate. So if you have a low retention rate, that impacts the business fundamentally. And this is a big problem for startups, because initially you're going to get a whole lot of customers that you are not going to be able to retain. So it kind of muddles a little bit your numbers initially, because you may be acquiring a cohort because they're interested in what you do, but then as they start using your product, they figure out, that wasn't quite what I was looking for, so they drop off. So the retention rate in this case means then that the lifetime value is only $200. Now you have to look at, okay, am I targeting the right customer? Do I need to put in place a retention strategy to increase my retention rate? I was working for a large American company at the time. We had relatively good retention rate. This was an established company, obviously, and we had a retention rate of about 75%. And they wanted to increase that by 5%. And we created a whole system and a whole layer, and we worked for years to perfect it. And it was possible to get there, to get to 80 to 85%. But for the bottom line of the business, it was worth a lot of money. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars just moving the needle that little. So retention rate becomes really, really important in businesses where you have the potential of repeat customers. Yes?
In MUC calculation, use net profit or what type of value? Gross margin that doesn't include the marketing cost?
So the MUC just has the direct cost of the product. So if you're selling a milkshake, it's just what's in the cup, essentially. Now you could calculate it slightly different if you wanted to, but I'll get to that later on. The one thing I haven't looked at in these calculations, just to keep it simple, is that if you have a high retention rate, so that your cash, you have a cash flow that comes in over a number of years, you could apply a discount rate so that you actually get an accurate net present value of the cash flow. I've kept it simple here, but if you are looking at sort of 4 or 5 year lifetime values, I would recommend you to do that for your own modeling purposes. So some rules of thumb in terms of the relationship between customer lifetime value and customer acquisition cost, that depending on your business, it should be between 3 to 5 times. The lifetime value should be about 3 to 5 times higher than your customer acquisition cost. So, in addition to covering just the cost of acquisition, the customer lifetime value also have to pay off all the costs, the fixed cost in the business, and the capital cost invested in building any kind of product and service that you have or infrastructure, as well as delivering the profits to the business. So that's why a 3 to 5, depending on the capital intensity, as well as the level of fixed cost that you have, is kind of where it looks like. A company like Salesforce apparently has a 5 times ratio, customer lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. Constant Contact, which is an email service, also has about 5 times. Whereas I think most investors are looking for any kind of cloud-based or software as a service type business, they're looking for at least a 3 times ratio. The other rule of thumb here is, and to be honest, I haven't run models on this myself, so I'm calling it a rule of thumb. I've seen it discussed by people that know a lot about these things, is that your customer acquisition cost should be earned back within the first 12 months. So it is just, it seems to be a sensible number to me, but obviously, again, it depends on the nature of your business. If your customer lifetime is really short, well then 12 months is a really long time. A lot of the cloud-based businesses these days are offering month-by-month subscriptions. So that kind of, then you have to break down your business and your customer lifetime value by month and see, okay, is that really worth it? So be a little bit careful about taking that one as gospel, but I thought it was useful just to have a bit of a pointer there. So what drives customer lifetime value? Obviously, if you have recurring revenue, that's great. That's what everyone is looking for. Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model Canvas, he says that one of the key qualities of of a great business model is that it has recurring revenue. So, and I think a lot of people recognize that as something that is desirable. Can you cross or upsell to your customers? So meaning once you have them, are we able to increase the share of wallet, as it's called, so you can get them to spend more with you by adding either more services or more features to your product? Can you expand and add more products to your existing portfolio that will also be able to charge back to existing customers? Or what a lot of people that, for instance, are in the events business do, they actually sell some of their contacts to third parties, so they make extra money and profits just being a lead generation tool. And you have businesses, you have actually entire businesses that are based on being lead generation tools, a lot of media entities as well, referral-based businesses. So that helps on your lifetime, and if you have scalable pricing so that as you become more sophisticated, you can serve a greater range of customers and allow you to capture a higher value. Those are the things that drives it up. Obviously, a low retention rate and low customer satisfaction are detrimental to this metric. All right, so let's look at customer acquisition cost. Essentially, you could operate with two different metrics depending on the level of human involvement or labor cost in your customer acquisition process. So you could say that, if you want, I just abbreviated here, marketing and sales cost. So if you are able to break out and understand and quantify the cost of the people involved in the sales process and attribute it to the individual sale, you could have that become part of the metric. Otherwise, just calculate the direct cost of the customer acquisition process itself. It is something that may be difficult to calculate very accurate to begin with, because there are a number of things that influence customer acquisition cost. So you don't know the length of your cycle time. Can you do a touchless customer acquisition process, or do you need to have people actually working part of the equation here? And then obviously your conversion rates are hugely important for this, and you don't know your conversion rates until you have a period of time has passed, so that you have some data to work with. So that's, so for really early stage startups, customer acquisition cost is really difficult to calculate, unless you're kind of this highly web-based type business where you generate a lot of data right from the get-go as you start communicating with the marketplace. The drivers of customer acquisition cost, what drives it up, obviously, as I said initially, field sales, long cycle times. So if it takes you, can you close it in a business deal in a month, or does it take you 9 months? Does it take you 18 months? That is an obvious driver of acquisition cost. Outbound marketing, if you have to do a lot of profiling and advertising and things to drive preference in your marketplace, that also drives up acquisition cost, because it's just very expensive. What helps you lower it? Viral effects. Obviously, at the height of the Facebook expansion, it was said that every new customer that Facebook added to, or user that was added to Facebook, they could calculate the viral effect of around 12, meaning that it added 12 new customers. That wasn't something that could continue in perpetuity, of course, but it's a nice effect of the business if it has this kind of virality. And a lot of people are trying to build virality into their product, so that sharing and referring becomes something that is valuable for your users to do. But it's very few can actually do it well. Inbound marketing, if you can do inbound marketing instead of, which is more sort of directed at getting actual interested customers directly to you, then you have a lower cost, touchless conversion, inside sales, and if you have other people doing customer acquisition for you, fantastic. So let's look at a couple of examples. So the first example is sort of a business-to-business example, and there's a lot of data here. So if I'm going through this too fast, let me know, and we'll slow it down. So my starting point here is that, okay, so we're a startup. We want to go out and start talking to customers, and we decide that there's a trade show that's ideal for us. We're going to go to that trade show, and we're going to walk the floor, going to meet people, hand out business cards, talk to them a little bit, and ask if they're interested. And that's going to be our MO for this trade show. So direct cost for the team to go to this trade show, $5,000, and indirect cost, meaning the cost of paying people, our staff, to be at the trade show, also $5,000, round numbers just to keep it easy. So total, initially, $10,000, and we come back with about 200 contacts overall. 12 of them have already asked for proposals, which is great, and 188 that we say wants more information. So potential customers. What we're trying to investigate for our own purposes is this a good show for us? Obviously, shows tend to go on and happen every year, and they have a relatively stable form of attendance. So you try to pick the shows that are most efficient for you. So do I meet the right types of businesses there? And are the people that I meet at right role, right level, so forth? And also, you're trying to figure out, how much should I invest at the show? You can spend a lot of money. And I've been at some trade shows where I look at some booths and I think, holy, there's a lot of money going into the trade show business with events. There are artists coming in sort of post-show playing music. There are drink mixing competitions. There's all sorts of things that you can do to drive up the cost of it. And you really have to be careful not to overspend because, one of the key problems with going to trade shows is that sales organizations have not traditionally been very good at following up on trade show leads, which kind of defeats the purpose of being there, but that's another discussion. So the plan. So we have to add our contacts to the CRM system, and we want to make sure that we identify this show as the source. And that's because, when we try to do these kind of business model analytics, we try to separate between different types of cohorts. It's important for me to understand how the leads that I get from the trade show perform to other leads that come from other sources. Whether I rent a list from a list provider, or there are people that just show up at my website and register with name and address and say, we'd like more information. So, always try to label it, where did the lead come from, so you can do an analytics based on that. And we want to make sure it's a specific identifiable cohort. So we start a nurture program, and we can discuss the strategy about this. This was just what I did for this particular example. I say I got two objectives with the nurture program. One is that as a startup, my fundamental problem is nobody knows me, and they don't know what kind of value I can offer, so I need to build credibility. And the second one, obviously, is can I convert as many as possible to paying customers here? So, we start by providing more information using email blasts, webinars, and direct calls in a particular order. There are two best practices when it comes to this type of content marketing. The first one is distribution. Distribution is proven to be actually more valuable to content marketing than, for instance, the quality of the content. So to reach a wider audience with relevant content is better than just having higher quality content to a smaller audience. The other best practice that I've identified around content marketing is that there's a rhythm to how you build value, credibility, and nurture leads using content. And that it goes, we'll do one email, we'll do another email, both are content oriented, and then the third email is a sales promotion. And then you build a rhythm of value, value, sales promotion, value, value, sales promotion. So going through that rhythm, and I've actually worked at, it came through an academic paper that I came across last year, and I've worked that in my own businesses as well, and it's a very efficient rhythm to use because it allows, once you've identified what's a good rhythm, you can streamline a lot of processes. So the first email blast then, we have 200 emails going out. It's a newsletter. In the newsletter is an invite to webinar. because I want to drive engagement. And the webinar is my engagement kind of metric that I'm looking at here. So I got 80 opens. I wrote here I could have A/B tested the subject just to make sure that I used the best way of attracting interest. But at 200, my cohort is just too small to do A/B testing. You need to have quantifiable feedback that is somewhat statistically reliable, and that's just even the whole cohort here needs to be involved in that process if I want to figure out that test. So it's difficult to do A/B testing if you don't have large enough volume in your cohort. You got 10 forwards, so if I use something like Constant Contact or MailChimp, it will tell you if the email was open and forwarded to a party that wasn't on your original mailing list. And I always think it's an interesting thing to monitor, because it tells you whether or not it's relevant for a particular organization, because it tends to be forwarded within certain organizations, the way it's been in the past. And then ultimately, I got 40 signups for the webinar. Okay. At the webinar itself, I got 30 attendees. The webinar is, again, it's value focused, it's content delivery, and we're talking about a topic that is directly related to the product that we're delivering. So we're adding value to the attendees' business. We're demonstrating our thought leadership and the quality of what we have in that webinar. And then obviously I have 10 no-shows. So what I do is, following the webinar, I'll give everyone a call. And I don't need to do the call, but because I'm a startup, I want to talk to people. I need the kind of the complexity of feedback that you can get from having a direct conversation, but I don't want to call everyone on my list here. So I focus on the people that attended, the 10 people that missed it. Like, I have an excuse to call them. Hey, I noticed you missed our webinar. Was there anything that happened, or can I help you out with something? As a way of making sure that you maintain the engagement with them. And then obviously I have 12 people that received the show proposals, so I need to try to drive that to a close as well. So that was the first email blast. So after a call then, I get 8 new people that ask for proposals. All right, great. I got also 6 that are not interested, and I got 38 maybes. So in the call, what I do is I have a trial close. So the trial close is just a way for me to measure the temperature in their interest. I pose a hypothetical question. Based on what you saw in this webinar, do you think, what's the likelihood that you become a customer? Or would you become a customer if I asked you for the order now? Some sort of question, a hypothetical question, it's easy to ask, and it's just because it's hypothetical, it doesn't necessarily sort of endanger or the relationship here. If you look at some of the cost metrics here, the labor and whatever we used to put together the email newsletter cost me $750. The webinar, $650 to develop the content and to use the platform. The direct call, obviously, high touch, much more expensive. And then total cost is about $3,300, and then per lead, that's $85. At this point, I don't have customers, so I can't divide my cost out on the customer base. I just have the leads. All right, so round 2. New newsletter, webinar 2. I get 60 opens, 10 forwards, and 30 people signing up for the webinar. The webinar itself, 25 attendees, and 5 no-show. So I don't do a direct call to follow up this one. I just want to get the sales promotion newsletter out. And the purpose of the sales promotion newsletter is to get them to act now. So I try to figure out, okay, how can I create some level of urgency with the customers at this point in time? I've had 3 touch points with them, possibly even 4 at this point in time. So, I try to figure out, okay, how can I entice them to buy now? There's no webinar. I don't want them to have a reason to postpone it at this time. The only thing I want is for them either to go directly to the product, my e-commerce, or call me. That's what I want. And then after the promotion newsletter goes out, I have a phone follow-up, and this is just to close the business. So, and now I call all of them. So it'll take me a little bit longer to get through. There's 200 people, it's about 1,000 dials to get out to get in touch with 200 people. So that'll take, the team a little bit time to get through. In the end, what we're left with is 20 requests for proposals from that round here, plus we had 20 already, so that's 40 proposals. So an average value of a proposal, $10,000. The pipeline is then 400,000. I'm not going to go into the calculation of the value of sales pipeline at this here, just thought I'd put the number up there. And the closing rate. So closing rate, what it means is essentially, I'm looking at all the proposals I have. What's the ratio of that would actually come back with a signature so that I can execute the contract? So that's 50%. It's a bit high, I would say, but it depends how well qualified the lead is. Maybe around 30% is more realistic, 30 to 25%. But the conversion rate is the interesting thing here, is that with that, I had 200 leads, I end up with 20 customers, so I have a conversion rate lead to customer of 10%. That's a number that is really important. Now I have a baseline case that I can start comparing any future trade show attendance with, is it better or worse, and allow me to prioritize in that way. And the cycle time here is also interesting because, 10 weeks, is it good or is it bad? Well, we don't know at this point in time. The business has cash flow needs, so we need to see if getting, about $200,000 worth of business at this point in time meet my cash flow need over a 10-week period. So may not be enough. Then again, we can do a trade show every month and just follow up in this rhythm. So, all right. So the calculation page then looks something like this. We had $10,000 cost. We had some follow-up cost. We had some direct calls that cost money. So in total, we ended up with $22,400. So the cost of customer acquisition is $1,100 following this rhythm here. Is it good or is it bad? Well, this is another sort of rule of thumb that I'm operating with, is that if sales and marketing can deliver a customer to the business and not charge more than 50% of the overall revenue, we're good. It depends about your business. It wouldn't work for a retailer. Any retail business, because their margins are way, way slimmer. So, 15% would be way too much. But in a business-to-business environment where we have other types of margins, and maybe even if this is a software as a service business or some sort of virtual business where there are essentially very low marginal cost to one extra customer, this is an ideal metric. So anything that's less than 15%, I'm cool with. Does that make sense? All right. So there's a lot of things that we can do to try to optimize this process. Now, we wanted to establish a baseline, so we just drove the case straight through. But, is there a way that we can, for instance, get more or better leads from the conference itself? This is sort of a post-show discussion that you could have with the team. Would it, for instance, be better if we started looking at who's typically at these conferences, reaching out to some of our key targets and say, are you going to be at this conference? Would you want to meet with me? So that instead of hunting down people at the trade show floor, I can just go into meetings that are scheduled with my high potential customers and have a much more targeted approach that way. I would recommend that. If you're in a position to do it, I think it's a sort of a trade show attendance best practice, if you like. The other thing, obviously, should we send more people to the trade show? Did we leave parts of the trade show floor completely uncovered, so there were potential leads that we missed? Or do we want to change our trade show attendance? Instead of walking around the floor trying to talk to people, should we have our booth? Should we try to sponsor events? Should we go all in and do sort of a big splash at each event? Those are our sort of post-show considerations. Collateral and tools. So how efficient were the conversations you had at the trade show floor? Did they work well? Did you need certain types of collateral to drive the conversation forward? I was at a trade show a couple of years ago, and I knew we'd just done an interesting case study that was relevant to a particular customer. And I walked up to this customer, their booth, and I talked to the president there, and I had my computer and I just flipped it open and said, there's something I really want you to see here. And it was like 3 slides. And because I was able to visualize it there and then, that conversation was completely different, and we had that business within 4 weeks. We had been trying for a year to get that customer, but because now I was able to visualize it and demonstrate something to the customer right there on the floor, it changed the dynamics of the conversation. So next time I went to that trade show, everyone had a tablet. So we had case studies, examples shown. So it was easy for everyone who was walking the floor and potentially talking to customers just to pull up relevant data and to help aid the conversation and bring it forward. Can you buy leads? So obviously a lot of these events organizers, a massive part of their business is that they trade in leads. So instead of attending at all, once you know it's a good show, why would you spend money on going there if you can buy those leads? So the question is, if I take my indirect cost out of the attendance here, the cost of the lead was $25. Can I reach out to this events organizer and buy all the leads for the conference at less than $25, and would that make a lot more sense to me? So that's an alternative to actually spending time. If it's a trade show that takes place and you're in the middle of something else and you say, okay, I don't know how we can make this work, let's just try to buy the leads instead. And then you have another cohort that you can work with and follow up with afterwards. So the conversion rates finally in the nurture program. If you have enough data, as I said, you run A/B tests to try to increase every step of the conversion rate. So, whether that's open rates of the email, the number of signups for your webinar, you want to test the subject line, your layout, and the sign up. We'll talk a little bit about conversion rate optimization shortly, but all of those things are possible once you start having data. We could try changing the timing of the webinar to reduce the no-shows, and we could also change the topic of the webinar. Try 2 different mailing lists and see, okay, which webinar topic seems to have the greatest sign up. So all of those things are possible. When it comes to optimization, there's 2 ways of doing it. We can either optimize at the cohort level, or we can optimize sort of at the process level. So I know there's a lot of information here, so I want to just walk carefully through this. The sample A here is the cohort that we just talked about, the trade show cohort, and that I took through this particular process. You could say, okay, I'm going to try to reduce my cost of customer acquisition and say, I'm going to take out from that process the most labor-intensive parts so that the cost of the acquisition process goes down. So instead of having the webinars and the phone calls in between, all I have is essentially email outreach. So those are the same parts that are here. They have been retained, but I'm not reaching out to anyone. So if your customer lifetime value is low and you need to cut out cost, you try to automate many parts of your sign up of your conversion process as possible. And finally, you could, if you had a third sample of your cohort, you could try a completely different type of acquisition process and say, okay, is there some parts of our products or our service that we're able to deliver for free? So we give them a free trial, and then we focus on upgrade promos. So, these 2 here are about, so more or less trying to figure out how to automate the process itself. This one here is more about or these two are actually content driven. That's what I want to say. These two processes are content driven. This one here is experience driven. So if you have a sticky product, if there's virality to your product, there could be a lot of value in just making sure people sign up, start using the product. You want to do it for free and what have you. So those are options that you have. Now, if you want, so the optimization maxim, I would say, sort of general rules, you optimize by cohort first if your cohort is large enough, and you have the bandwidth to manage the test iterations in parallel. Because it does require discipline and consistency from the team. So if you're not able to run the test iterations in parallel, you lose a lot of value, and that could potentially be in the data. You optimize the process first if your code is too small to split up, and your resources do not allow to run the various processes in parallel. So, if you want to optimize by process, this is what it would look like. So essentially then, you have the trade show sample, maybe you have website signups, and you have different cohorts that you run through the exact same process. The purpose of this is to figure out, okay, first of all, you want to know which source is the best for you, and by running them through the exact same process, you can then trace back to the cohort which leads are the best. And that's an absolute key metric for you. And then finally, you want to try to figure out, okay, and iterate around the process itself. So if you manage these three cohorts, put it through one process, and then you can put it through a different process the next time around, it allows you to optimize the conversion rates in that process. Any questions at this point? Does this make sense? I know this is a lot of content, but that's best practices for you. Yes?
How would I measure the effectiveness or the value of a trade show where I'm not trying to get sales, instead I'm trying to get awareness and outreach and partnerships?
Sorry, Jon, could you repeat the question?
Sure, exactly. So the question is, how can you measure or value a trade show that has a different objective, whether it is to drive awareness? What were the other things? Awareness?
Awareness and partnerships, primarily.
And partnerships. So I think they'll be almost similar. What is awareness?
Well, the number of, obviously, mentions in the press, hits to your website, your brand perception, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, okay, so I mean, those things can be measured. You just have to, for instance, Google alerts could pick up your mentions in the press if they're quoted. Partnerships are similar to customers, so that can be measured at the lead basis, and if you get a lot of attention from potential partners and how those conversations go. So there are, like, awareness, it has to sort of, I feel it has to have a purpose in and of itself. So I don't know if awareness, does it drive leads in the end? Does it have a different purpose?
Well, like in our case here, we went to the Consumer Electronics Show.
Okay.
With the intent of becoming part of the discussion and becoming part of, a trend that was growing in the industry. Sure. Right? So I would love to be able to do some kind of math in the back of it and go, okay, this was worth the $30,000 that it cost to do it.
So you'd have to have set up a few relative specific ways of measuring it, and ideally you'd set up those metrics before. If you want to become part of the discussion, there's obviously Twitter, and is there are you mentioned at Twitter, or some of the things that you talk about mentioned at Twitter? Are you being featured in some of the blogs? So there's metrics you could measure sort of before and after the show. it's really important whenever we're trying to do this that we have a baseline of comparison. Otherwise, we don't know if what we're doing is efficient. So, but think about it before. Like, you have to try to figure out how to quantify these things, and it can be quite detailed. You know, do you want to get on some specific key opinion leaders or tech analysts' attention? Then you name those, you target those. And that's what happens at the trade show, and you see post-show, what kind of conversations come up, and are you able to drive attention from those? Are you able to drive Twitter feeds or other types of recognition? Okay, so so this is to the point here. Know what you're optimizing for. Use tools that allow you to track the cohorts and the processes, and think about design of the test that you're doing, because it is really important for the test to be effective, that you know what exactly is it that you're trying to test for, whether it's awareness or whether it's sales leads or whether it's a particular part of the conversion process. All right, so if you're running then a totally web-enabled business, it's impossible to disregard what's called conversion rate optimization. There's a massive conversation going on about conversion rate optimization. It's been part of pretty much every significant conference that I've seen in terms of the webosphere or what have you. So there's a lot of content out there. I'm going to go through an example. Some of you may have seen this because it became famous overnight. It's a takeout technology firm called Eat24. And the reason why I like it is that they're in a situation which a lot of startups find themselves in. They're bootstrapping. They don't have access to VC funding. Maybe they don't even want it. So they need to make sure that they put their dollars to good use and get effect from that. They've been building sort of a tongue-in-cheek type identity, and you'll see some of that in the case here. And what they noticed was that through Twitter feeds, that a lot of porn stars tweeted there and thanked them for delivering services. So, essentially what they wanted to test is porn site could be a viable source of leads. So, the main hypothesis is, does porn make people hungry? So they started out figuring out, okay, what are the popular websites here? And of the 100 most popular websites in the US, a lot of porn websites rank higher than a lot of other things that we would expect to be big traffic websites. But would they reach the right audience? So when they got the breakdown here, 30% of all web traffic is dedicated to porn. There's about 40 million Americans that are regular visitors to porn sites. 2/3 of men admit to watching porn, and 1/3 of women. 70% of those women or of those men are 18 to 24, which is kind of a core target group for them. And 85% watch porn at the same time as the takeout services are busy. So that was a kind of a key metric for them when they looked at this. So they then contacted the porn site and said, okay, how much is this going to cost us? And they figured out that it was dirt cheap. So it was really, really cheap to cost per impression, porn sites versus Google, Facebook, and some of the other places where they had tried to advertise before. They had done experiments at Facebook and blown their entire budget in the space of a day. And if they advertised at a porn site, they could potentially stretch their budget 10 times. So they tested a few ad designs. As you do, you develop a creative, and this is what I said. They have this kind of tongue-in-cheek type brand, so they went all out. If you're interested, the case study is very well written. It's on their blog. I'd recommend you to take a look. It's just because it gives a real insight into, and you can take porn out of the equation here because it's just the process of going through this whole optimization that is interesting here. So they also tested placement, landing page versus home page. So they did sort of A/B split testing for that, and figure out that they got, at this page, no use in being placed. They got all the traffic if they're on a video landing page. So results and learnings. First of all, the ad with the monkey was rejected. So that was, and after a few conversations, it turns out that the porn industry doesn't like any kind of animal associations. So that one didn't work, but the rest of the ads were accepted. So there was, as I said, the video landing page had a 5 times click-through rate compared to the front page. The porn banner ads had 3 times the number of impressions of Google and Facebook and Twitter combined sorry, that's supposed to be a percentage sign there. My apologies. So at 10% of the cost, they got 3 times as many click-throughs. So it's worth noting here that they came into this then having baseline information. They had done tests with Twitter, with Facebook, and with Google, so that they had a point of comparison that told them, is this worth doing or not? They noticed, so this is my only beef with this, they actually didn't provide the actual conversion metrics. All they said was that the order spiked when the porn ads ran, so they felt it was well worth doing. And interestingly, that 90% of the porn ad traffic was unique visitors. So they were tapping into a completely new audience and market for them. And they had a great customer retention of the cohorts that came from the porn site. So again, and much more loyalty from the porn viewers than they had, for instance, from Facebook. And finally, they thought Chicago, they did a lot of, there's a lot of cheesy stuff coming out in this case study, which is why I say it's entertaining to read. What worked best? This ad was scored the best, and this one here didn't work really well. So they ran with those 3 ones after they had done the initial testing of it. So they needed to have different creatives out there, but these 2 here didn't convert well enough. Generally, the conversion rate optimization process, you have to figure out, first of all, what is it that I'm trying to improve here? Then, your current performance is your baseline. So do you have something to compare with? What is it? Make sure you study your data as they are now so that you have a good point of comparison. And then you do a brainstorming and say, okay, what could we change? What are the things that we feel would help drive a change in this metric here? You devise an A/B split test to see if the hypothesis is valid, and then you measure your results and you implement the learnings. So that's basically how you do conversion rate optimization. And there's actually a lot of tools out there to help you do those kind of things today, especially at the website level. So, recommendations. The customer acquisition is the most important activity in the business, and it is everyone's business in a startup. Yes?
I have a question. Was there any blowback to back up E24 being associated with porn websites?
Maybe. That wasn't written in the case study because they wrote their own case study. So, I can tell you, obviously there are ethical issues. When you advertise on a porn website, you are putting money into the porn business. So, would I do it for my startup? Never. That wouldn't be an option. I could sit here and look at these kind of cost per impression numbers and say, okay, they're super cheap, but I don't want to be involved in that. So, as a startup owner, you have that choice, and you can make that choice for yourself. I think it works for them because they already had this kind of loose and locker type tongue-in-cheek culture for their brand. So my expectation is that it wouldn't actually create too much of a blowback for them. You know, when we looked at the bubble chart with all the different audiences, the overlap between their target audience and the porn website, it was pretty high. So I don't think it was like, I haven't seen anything. And the case that it did receive a lot of press, you know, at Reddit and some of the others, other websites that write about this, and I haven't seen anything particular about it. Any other questions? So the point I wanted to make here, you know, when you're starting your business, customer acquisition is for everyone in the team. Don't hire a salesperson who's not part of the founding team, who can't influence the product, your website, or anything else to try to figure this out for you. It doesn't work. You have to be involved as a founder, whether you're a CTO, a hacker, or designer, or a marketing person. It's everyone's business. So you make it everyone's business by trying to build this into the culture. I feel right now is when we have an opportunity to start building a culture of customer acquisition as part of the DNA of the company. And you do that by making sure that it is prioritized. If you have the opportunity to spend money, to spend time, and to dedicate, whether it's labor or money, onto customer acquisition, you do that as much as you spend on your product. Because it is just as important to figure out as building a product. Understand what you want to achieve and how to measure it. That goes for everything. Like the two main metrics, customer lifetime value, customer acquisition cost, are made up of a lot of smaller variables, and you try to measure that as much as possible. When you're at the really early stage, your data is going to be garbage, but as long as you know that, I still think that you need to try to measure it, just because you want to get into the point and the culture and the process of measuring things. It shouldn't be an afterthought. Yes?
Is there a standardized tool or software that we can buy that we can plug in?
No, not necessarily. There are lots of tools. So, because businesses are so different, you know, you need to have a, like, let me respond to that in a couple of minutes. You plan campaigns as experiments, meaning that you want to take a little bit of a scientific approach to it. Your business is as a lab at some point where you're trying to answer a lot of uncertain questions. So know what you're testing for, and make sure that you measure the results. And master the process. As I said initially, the data is going to be garbage. It's not going to matter. But so the key thing is just you want to do it so that you get into and figure out what is the process of testing, measuring, and learning looking like for our business. And then find the tools that can support you. You need tools for managing customer contacts. You need something that can handle email delivery, funnel measurement, and funnel management. There are tools out there that help you build microsites that you can attach to each and every campaign you do. There are tools that help you with A/B testing, and there are tools that can help you to do surveys. So just going back to the question that you had initially, you know, you could do a survey, a post-show survey. If you had certain people that you wanted to target, you could either do an automated survey, or you could use direct phone search and test for specific things that you wanted to achieve during the show. So, because measuring the types of variables you said, there may not be any sort of direct electronic or digital way of tracing it. So you kind of have to do it in a slightly more, let's call it manual way. So the survey would be probably the best option there, you know, in addition to the other things.
And that'd be a survey sent out to, so if I had a list of, let's just say 1,000 people, that I was like, I want these people to know about me.
Yeah.
You get their emails, you just email them the survey and be like, have you ever heard of?
Yeah, I mean, awareness is a very traditional market research question, so there are a few ways of testing that. the variable that is important for startups is one that is called Net Promoter Score.
Yeah.
And it's easy to look up how to measure that. But a line of questioning that allows you to calculate a Net Promoter Score, because as you build awareness, you want to use the Net Promoter Score benchmark to to sort of have something to go back with and try to understand if your activities are working. All right, so final thing is, just going to leave you with this quote here. We talked a lot about data and analytics, and if you massage the data long enough, or if you torture it long enough, it is going to give you the answer you want to know. So just make sure that you're accountable to each other in your team, and don't try to fudge things. There is this thing called vanity metrics, meaning there's lots of data out there that has no value for you. They may make you look good, but in the end, it's all about happy customers and dollars in the bank. So if the metrics don't relate to that somehow, I wouldn't necessarily take it too seriously. That's it. Thank you.